with our website. You can study with us in a couple of different ways. You can listen to the free audio podcasts that we do every week. You find those on our home page. There's a forecasting menu that drops down, and you can go look at this podcast right there, or you can subscribe to them, and then they show up in your browser every week as soon as we post them. We also have an Astral Library that is subscribable to by 3 sections, and we have our multimedia course. Here's a little bit more on the EAN Astral Library, where we have 3 different sections of streaming audio and video materials. You can subscribe 1 month, 6, 12 months, or a monthly recurring. And you can also subscribe to all 3 sections of our Astral Library the same way. Basically, as you look at the number of those titles and hours, this is a dozen years of material that EAN has put together with Kim Marie and other practicing evolutionary astrologers across planet Earth. Here's the 3 segments to our multimedia course. As you can see them on your screen, you can also see that each of them come with binders, DVDs. Segments 1 and 2 have an original transcript of the first school Jeffrey Wolf Green ever taught. And we also have Facebook forums and monthly classes for segments 1 and 2 as well. And if you're interested, we always are happy to send a free sample of an actual class if you'd like to peruse one before becoming a student at EAN.
And you can do that
so here's our opening slide. Go ahead.
I was just going to tell everybody that you can just request that free segment 1 webinar by just shooting MediaMonk at evolutionaryastrology.net an email, and I'll get you information about our new our course information, of course, that PDF that contains the MP3 download link for that webinar, as well as the permanent video for that webinar, all the slides that Kim produced in creating the webinar, all that will be included in that PDF. And also talk a little bit in that email I'll return to you about our digital-only pricing in 2015. We're just working on organizing our multimedia course into one option with backup DVDs and all the charts, graphics, binders, materials, tabs, everything that we ship out in our usual course materials. But then we're also going to secure some PDFs and put them online for viewing only, and that'll be the digital version, because we already have up all the videos already streaming off the registered 1 or segment 1, segment 2 registered students areas.
And you're in process with segment 3, is that correct? Oh, he may have muted himself back already.
Well, we just need to figure out where to put the segment 3 material. I think it'll end up in probably a combination of the section 3 of our Astral Library and whatever the online digital course morphs into between now and our final decision here in January, Kim.
All right. Thank you. All right, everyone. 2015, what is ahead for us? First of all, 2015 will seem like it is a carryover, more of the same from 2014. Yes, sirree, that is true. And yet it will seem like it's going to get more intense and even more in our world, our lives, the world on planet Earth, seeming more and more unsteady as these Uranus-Pluto squares get past their 90-degree mark and really start moving forward into the future. More on that with some slides up ahead. 2015 is going to be a year of financial events, and we're going to recognize more and more how much we are a global community. And regardless of all the different currencies that we may have on planet Earth, we're going to recognize that all of those currencies are interrelated and interactive, just as we human beings, as groups of people. And so as we look at financial events coming across on planet Earth here, we can see a range from negative to positive, and I'll weave some of those in for you as well over the next couple of hours. We're going to see climate change continue to pick up speed and intensity. Within that, we're going to look at travel continuing to be riskier and riskier with weather extremes. I probably don't need to remind any of you that we just had another major airline disaster over in Indonesia with an extreme of a weather event. We can start looking at all kinds of different Earth events on planet Earth taking place, not just in the air, but all four elements: fire, earth, air, water. And who knows where the next one will spring up. But if you think that we're done with climate change, no. It is just beginning to heat up. And as you can see, looking at some of our national governments, we really aren't doing much to address that area of change. However, you can bet your bottom line that that's taking place in the corporate world. You can bet your bottom line it's also taking place in the military side of any government, because as we look at coastal regions becoming more disturbed, people becoming no place to live, becoming the, I'm not thinking of the word, I want to say pilgrim, but you know what, refugees. You can bet that insurance companies and militaries and all of the corporations that are so multinational now, they're all behind the scenes running their spreadsheets on how climate change will affect them. Sooner or later, we'll see governments start to catch up. Will it be 2015? I don't know. I think it's a long shot. By the end of this decade, I think it will become a non-issue. It may become a big issue in the 2016 presidential elections in the United States. And of course, as many of us who are familiar with the archetypes of Uranus and Pluto may know, social unrest will continue to expand and grow as we get past these first quarter squares of Uranus and Pluto. With Saturn moving into Sagittarius, we're going to draw in the religious component again over the next 3 years, starting with 2015. And all of these issues, whether it's climate change, religion, banking, social justice, whatever, the appearance of the diversity of the major issues taking place, we're going to start to recognize that they are all interrelated. They're all tied together with Saturn in Sagittarius. That's the big picture of Saturn in Sag. Numerology. Let's start with the numerology. As you can see on your screen, 2 plus 0 plus 1 plus 5 equals 8. And so as we have come to number our years across most of the westernized world, those years can be reduced into single digits, and they follow a 1 through 9 year cycle in numerology. And 8 years are most commonly known as money years, as power years. And perhaps you might be familiar that if you take that letter 8 and you turn it on its side, it becomes what we commonly call the infinity symbol in math. And we look at that infinity symbol in the world of metaphysics as the two circles that have no beginning and no end. But when we lay that infinity symbol or the number 8 on its side, what we really are looking at is balancing out extremes and extremes of imbalances when we are not paying attention or honoring what we in evolutionary astrology call natural laws or natural spiritual principles. And so we can see, because of it just being an 8 year, that we might be looking at extremes of imbalances across various places on the planet. We'll look at planet Earth herself, or Gaia, as a living being working to bring things into balance, be it weather changes or be it through the consciousness of human beings, looking for giving, sharing, including for all of us again, fair and equitable social factors or financial factors, looking to balance for all species on Gaia as well. Now, as an 8-year with 9-year numerological cycles that then start over with a 1 after 9, by the time we get to 8 years, we're looking at reward years. We're having a culmination of the 7 years that came before. So for many of us on personal levels, we might see some things coming into fruition for ourselves. And the distortions of that, if we've not been making our efforts over the last few years, we can have the opposite of the rewards, which we may know as the failures. Where did we not make the effort so it's not coming into fruition? Or where has something started to run its natural course, and the 8-year preceding a 9-year, it's starting to give way because there's something about that area that no longer works. For example, we cannot continue to live with such a carbon producing society on planet Earth anymore. Are we going to recognize that this year? I don't know. China's putting a new coal plant up I don't remember what the fact was. I mean, it was some ridiculous figure, like once every 24 hours they have a new coal plant come online. So we may not be recognizing that on a global scale, but there will be areas across planet Earth where we are recognizing how our carbon-producing society is not working. So because this is a power year as well, and an 8-year, one of the things that we really want to be looking for on an individual level is our own inner power. Because all of everything that is within us, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, all of that is within our individual ability to control. What we cannot control is the outer world, or outer power. And so we'll go back and forth in this 8-year. One of these things we'll be trying to balance within ourselves is balance a sense of inner power and inner security as the chaos of the outer world revolves around us and sometimes finds us right smack dab in the middle of the changes. By the way, if any of you have questions or comments, you will see on your screen a menu. If it's not open, it's just a little vertical menu with an orange arrow. You click on the orange arrow, it opens up your individual pane. You can type in questions. If you have, Leroy runs the Q&A board. He'll answer those as best as he can. He'll ask me if I need to answer or he wants me to answer a question, or he will unmute you if you'd like to ask one live. If you do want to speak live, we ask that you have yourself hooked up to some type of headset with perhaps a USB device connected to your electronic device so that we can all hear you clearly. But by all means, if you have questions or comments, you are welcome to interact with us over the next couple of hours. I thought I'd give you just some basics in numerology as well. Florence Campbell, back in the 1930s, wrote the first numerology book. What was the name of it? The Power of Numbers or something like that. I don't remember. I just quickly jotted down some keywords of 3 people in the metaphysical world over this last century. Florence Campbell, 8 years are business years, turning the wheels, expanding, prosperity or downfall, power, work, effort, Everything's bigger, bigger, bigger in 8 years. Dusty Bunker, who wrote Numerology and the Divine Triangle, I think in the 80s or 90s. And then 8 years where we assume power, where we can have financial rewards, recognition. Karma is king in 8 years. We reap what we have sown, or we fail to reap what we fail to sow. We have that drive to overcome obstacles. In other words, we can persevere. And 8 years are responsibility years. Many of you might know Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life, her most successful book that started her out. She calls an 8 year a success time, a harvest year, but we still must put out the effort to accomplish anything. It is an achievement year. It's a year to be efficient and organized. She too, business years. And we can have unexpected financial rewards or expenses as well. So I think you can start to get a little bit of an overview of this 8 year. Adding in the astrology, this current 9 year cycle started in 2008. 2 plus 0 plus 0 plus 8 equals 10. 1 plus 0 is 1. And that was the same year that Pluto entered Capricorn. Remember that? Can you believe that it was 7 years ago already? And many of us saw the financial downturns in Pluto in Capricorn, in the banking system, and how it had that rippling effect across planet Earth. Again, this is going to cycle back around with an 8 year and the relationship of resources to 8. 8 will naturally relate to the sign of Scorpio and the 8th house as well, which, as you know from just their archetypes, they relate to power or powerlessness. They relate to resources, especially shared resources. The 8th harmonic, when you take the circle, like you see right here on your screen, and you divide it by 8, see these 8 pie-shaped segments? This is where we come up with the 8 phases in astrology. But the 8th harmonic is what gives us all the aspects of what we will call the semi-squares, the squares, the sesquisquadrates, the oppositions. These are all known as tension or stressful aspects. Basically, each one of these aspects in these 8 phases is yang energy moving to yin, or energy moving outward, switching to energy moving inward. And that's kind of a lot of what will create that sense of tension or stress within us, because the energy has been so used to going outward, and now we're being asked to go back inward. So there's a tension, there's that infinity symbol again of balancing the outer and inner whenever we are working our way through an 8 year. And one of the things you're going to see throughout the aspects of 2015 is we have got semi-squares, squares, sesquisquadrates, and oppositions with the outer planets. They take up a lot of the energy for 2015. Starting off, many times astrologers would like to do that ingress chart. And in this case, it's the ingress of January 1st, 2015. Those of you who have studied with me before know that I like to use 0 degrees Aries houses when I teach classes, because we're all tuning in from all across planet Earth. Now, I do use my time zone and location here in western South Dakota. But I like to use the 0 degree Aries signs so that this natural zodiac matches up with the houses, and you get a clear picture when you're starting to look at what we have going on. So here's the initiation for this year. And as you can see, what is so stark on your screen is the fact that the month of January brings us closer and closer to Pluto square the nodes and Uranus conjunct the south node. I did a whole class on this last month. I refer you to that on our forecasting webinar page if you'd like to get more details on this. Basically, on January 15th, Pluto will be exactly square the nodes of the moon, with Pluto at 13 Capricorn, 39 minutes. So south node would be 1339 Aries, north node 1339 Libra. Uranus will conjunct the south node January 20th at 12 degrees Aries, 56 minutes. So you can see how close they are. And of course, in this chart, what did we have? We had the moon square the nodes as well. And I've got this chart for the full moon coming up from January 4th in just a moment. But this sets the flavor for the year. Now, Pluto square the nodes in evolutionary astrology is skip steps within the soul. And what is the soul skipping back and forth between? Pluto in Capricorn is self-responsibility, self-authority, and how we have our maturation process on planet Earth and with planet Earth. And when it's square the nodes in Aries Libra, we are bouncing back and forth between ourself and relationships. And if we're not paying attention to our past, that Uranus is coming over here to so enlighten us and wake us up with, we can be quite defensive. We can be isolating ourselves. We can crawl off into our caves, or we can take that Uranian upper hand of elitism and think my way is the right way, and we can completely eclipse this north node in Libra over here, which is about all of our relationships and that equality of giving and sharing. So we can have these skip steps, these unbroken or broken up lessons between ourselves and others, and go back and forth between these extremes. And we can do it as individuals, we can do it as groups of people, blacks and whites, police forces and public. We can do it between countries over our fiscal units in banking, such as the dollar and the ruble with Russia that's going on right now. We must be very, very careful that we're taking an honest look at ourselves and our past and what's being made conscious within us, and then make that effort to go to the North Node. In evolutionary astrology, when a planet is square the nodes, the resolution node is you start with the planet, in this case Pluto, or the Sun. You go retrograde because that's the mean motion of the nodes. You reverse through the houses in the zodiac, and you come to the North Node. The North Node is the resolution node for this configuration and what we are needing to be working through. So each of us all year long, from the most one-on-one to the broadest level of relationships you participate in, you must reach for fairness. You must reach for equal ground. You must reach for equal giving and receiving. You must make the extra effort in relationships. Again, that real danger is Uranus becoming a real strong rebel in Aries and doing that patriarchal me versus you and us versus them polarities. And all that will do is intensify the rest of this decade, not to mention this year. The other striking thing that's going on in this New Year's chart is the fact that we actually have a grand cross with 4 planets. You perhaps were aware of the Mars-Jupiter oppositions taking place at 21 degrees Aquarius Leo respectively. Well, on New Year's, the moon was squatted down at 24 degrees Taurus, and it drew in Saturn over here, barely 1 degree Sagittarius. And even though it's moved from Scorpio to Sag, it's not hard to see this grand cross going through or coming through on this New Year's chart. So here is Moon, Saturn, feminine, masculine, mom, dad, inner, outer, the rulers of, Saturn rules Capricorn, Moon, or that polarity Cancer, Moon's natural rulership. Here we are dragging in, again, all of the familial issues. We have to watch the stubbornness around them. We're drawing in all of the gender issues. We're drawing in all of the community versus authority issues. You want to bring the Mars-Jupiter oppositions into play. We've been familiar with how Jupiter in Leo really has all of us wanting to stick up for ourselves in the world, and deeper levels of wanting to reach into um, inner self-love. That creative self-actualization is the key word for Leo. And so Jupiter in Leo is opening that up within us. Can we acknowledge who we are on planet Earth? Mars in Aquarius is over here quite detached from it all. This can be the elitism again. This can be the differences in class systems that we can start to draw in with this Grand Cross. Mars in Aquarius could bring some objectivity to us. If we are doing the Jupiter and Leo trauma dramas, Mars in Aquarius is asking us to step back, see the larger picture, see our role in the picture. So we had this T-square with Uranus and Pluto in the cardinal signs. Now we have a Grand Cross in the fixed signs, with the exception of Saturn, early Sag, trying to open us up to larger pictures to see what is going on planet Earth. So just looking at these two configurations in the New Year's chart, there's initiation, and there is, hold on, you're changing too fast, I don't know if I'm ready yet. Add in the full moon that we had just a few days later, and all the moon did is move from the Grand Cross to the T-square, or the Pluto Sun square the nodes, and we brought the moon in on this level with the cardinal. So the moon, because of this full moon that came so close to the beginning of the year, it's setting this ingress chart off. And it's basically having us going back and forth between cardinal and again the fixed from the moon that was back here on New Year's Day. Now, to me, I do see Saturn in Sag is really being some of the light this year in having us get out of that heavy, emotional, intense, feet stuck in the ground Scorpio energy, and going, wait a minute, can we look at a little bit of a bigger picture that's going on right here? So I just wanted to touch on this ingress chart.
Kim?
Yep.
Yeah, just, with all these squares and T-squares, it's, with Pluto and this T-square, it's so easy for us to want to move forward so quickly in a new year. I think that's important to realize that Pluto works in the invisible realm. Everything's underneath the surface with Pluto. Mm-hmm. And it's, if things aren't really appearing in tangible form yet, I think patience needs to be a key word here at the beginning of the year, because of the way that Pluto indeed does work. And with that waxing square Uranus and Aries, it's going to be the tendency is going to want to be to ramp and amp forward. It's really calling us to be a little patient with ourselves as well.
Well, when you look at the fact that we have this Grand Cross in the New Year's ingress chart, and the fact that we have an 8-year, and remember the 8-year brought up the semi-squares, the squares, the opposition. So there's this tug of war between change and security that is really, two of the major flavors for this year that is taking place. How many of you are familiar with the pop song by Megan Taylor called It's All About the Bass? It's all about the bass, no treble. I have a 5-year-old niece, and I can't tell you how many times I sang that over Christmas holidays, let alone danced it with her. It is just a darling, darling song, and it is celebrating basically the female booty, or the female posterior or butt, And if you want to, you could go Google her and watch the YouTube video dancing to this song, because it's really a celebration of women in all our many sizes versus the Barbie doll, what is it, 36, 24, 36 or something like that. And I thought, yeah, anyway, I just thought it was such a cute little song, and it was reminding me, as we have talked many times on our podcast, about the bass notes, speaking musically, with Uranus and Pluto, and it is going to be all about the bass this year, no matter which one of these many subjects here you are looking at, no matter what country you may happen to reside in. So the bass is this bass note that we call Uranus square Pluto. And we just had the sixth waxing square in December. The seventh of 7 will be March 16th, with Uranus in Aries and Pluto in Capricorn at about 15 degrees. And so if you thought it was all over because we got past those 7 waxing squares that started in 2012, you might be a little disappointed. Uranus is going to remain within a 10-degree orb. In other words, it's never going to get 10 degrees past the 90-degree square. It will get, in other words, from 90 to 100 degrees from Uranus from Pluto. It's going to remain within 10 degrees of that square throughout 2018. And we're going to get to the summer fall of 2015, 2016, 2017, and they're going to be like 1 degree apart, 2 degrees, 3 degrees apart. They're going to match up late every year in the summer, or not match up. They're going to get within orb of being so close, it's going to feel like a square again. And now that we actually have Uranus past 90 degrees past Pluto as of March, this is that lag time in manifestation that astrologers talk about. Just because we've had 7 waxing squares doesn't mean something happens exactly on one of those dates that we had the square. When we're talking about consensus society, there is that delay in the consensus catching up. And so we're going to continue to see everything that was sparking us in 2014 do the same stuff and more throughout 2015. And as a matter of fact, we could have a few more social subjects that we add into the picture. Again, I think the financial one's going to come swinging back around again in 2015 because it's an 8-year. We could have other countries having other types of rebellions beyond the Arab Spring and the umbrella revolution that we saw in Hong Kong. You name the social subject, you name the country, and that stuff is going to continue to come to our attention throughout this year. So Uranus is going to continue to uproot any Plutonian structure. And the new ways are not going to be manifested yet. They're going to be unknown. They're going to be unproven. And what's going to seem like is happening is that it's just coming on faster and faster and faster, and more change and more change and more change. And in an 8-year, and again, that ingress chart, we're going to try and put our feet in the ground and slow it down. And it's not going to be the norm. It's not going to be what we want to be working with. We're really going to want to learn how to be okay through the changes. Through something in your job situation, it worked last year, it's not working this year. It worked yesterday, it's not working today. Something in your relationships worked 2 weeks ago, it's not going to work the same this year. We got a Venus retrograde this year. And so we've really got to be okay. What is that? Jeffrey Green used to have a cliche for Pluto in the 3rd house. My foundation is in movement itself. My foundation is in movement itself. That could be your 2015 mantra. I liked this one. Justice for, I left it blank because I'll probably need this next year. chances are we'll see that sign multiple times this year, multiple countries. These Uranus-Pluto squares, the insecurity of changes creates choice. With Pluto in Capricorn, there is such a desire, Pluto, dual desire nature. There's such a desire to cling to the past, to tradition, to cling to on an individual basis, however we've had our world put together up until this point, because that sense of the past or what is known gives us security. And yet Uranus in Aries is urging us to become a part of the change, to just throw it off, to really move forward, to see what's new and different and exciting and changing, or to be a part of any type of social movement that we feel drawn to. And then there are all of those souls who float in the middle, who either are so much into their own world, they're just apathetic to what's going on around them. I have family members who couldn't tell you anything that's going on in the world socially or politically. And there are also those who are just looking to see what's the winning side. And they're going to choose to go with whatever movement that is. In other words, they're just ebbing and flowing in the middle. So the degree of changes that we're going to see with this base node of Uranus square Pluto is going to be entirely dependent upon how much of the world chooses to get involved, how much of the world is forced to get involved. If there's enough of climate change disrupting enough of our resources on planet Earth, many of us will be forced to get involved by necessity because it's going to affect us in our pocketbook. If all of the derivatives, gambling, and the shadow banking system goes south with their oil commodity derivatives and the low price, you can bet your bottom line it's going to have about 98% of us standing up and get involved when they start confiscating the cash in our checking account. Stay tuned for that one. I got a slide on it. So what's happening with this Uranus-Pluto square is we're reaching those middle degrees of Pluto and Capricorn's 15-year cycle. It's going to be between 13 and 16 degrees that Pluto travels through its retrograde. So as we get to this halfway point of Pluto's transit, we're going to recognize all of those structures in our world, in society, that are no longer sustainable. It's not just going to be leading edge to see this. It's going to become recognizable even in our consensus world, the 7 out of 10 with cowbells around their neck as EA observes them. So it doesn't matter what type of structure, government, financial, social, familial, gender, climate, social, blah, blah, blah. We're all recognizing the many ways in which those structures are not working. And so how many of us Uranus and Aries are going to get involved in being the change we want to see? The coins that you see on your screen is the Russian ruble. And that is the Russian paper money that you see in the back of the screen. Many times in general, the larger a structure under any of these categories, the slower the changes are. However, the more radical the changes when they do come. If you were in Russia right now, you bet your bottom line you'd be paying attention to how your ruble is doing and how it is affecting the groceries and petrol in your vehicles. So that's just one example of this, of what's coming on. And by the way, most of your alternative media feels that it is the United States and Saudi Arabia that is behind the dropping of the oil prices, trying to wreck the ruble. However, they have to be very careful because they really are playing Russian roulette, because of all the shadow banking in the US and Europe and all of the gambling with oil as a commodity. The derivatives market will not be sustained if these oil prices continue to stay this low. Sooner or later, we're going to have some major too big to fail banks not being able to sustain themselves. So if you do have any resources, you put it in your community banks, you put it in your credit unions. Uranus in Aries is going to continue to try many different changes. In other words, as we move through not just 2015, but even the rest of this decade, the old stuff is crumbling, but the new is not replacing it yet. And that's going to be emphasized by Saturn in Sag, Neptune in Pisces, and in the middle of this year, Jupiter in Virgo. They're going to move in. Jupiter's going to join Saturn and Neptune and Chiron in mutable signs, and we don't know what's going to replace the old. The plutocrats are trying just put it back together again like Humpty Dumpty. And Uranus in Aries is not going to let that happen. But Uranus in Aries is not going to tell us exactly what's going to be coming yet for another few years. It's going to take probably until Uranus is in Taurus before we really see how some of these new structures are going to be taking place. Even though it creates a lot of unsettlement for many of us, in the larger picture, that's a good thing, because after 5,000 years of patriarchy, we need chaos for a while to really give the new systems, the more matriarchally based systems as we know in the world of EA, to give them a grassroots chance to really take hold. Otherwise, we'll just see history repeating itself. The polarity points of these Uranus-Pluto squares is really the directions forward. The opposite of Uranus in Aries is Libra, as you can see on your screen. The unity and diversity, the equality of giving and receiving. Again, just like the North Node, the need to recognize that we are all related here on planet Earth. As the Lakota say, Mayataki Owasin, we are all related. The polarity of Pluto in Capricorn is Cancer. And I've been saying this for several years now through Pluto and Cap. The Cancer polarity, change comes from the grassroots up. As all of the Plutonian structures crumble, it is the tribe, it's the family, it's the community, it's the grassroots efforts that are going to build the new stuff from the bottom up. How are you involved with that? What ways get you excited to be involved? And of course, we've got to go for that inner security and emotional well-being to find that inner peace through the changing of all these crumbling structures we have going on. Now, just briefly for you, I use the U.S. Gemini rising chart, July 4th, 1776 to 17 a.m. Regardless of whether you use this chart or the Sibley chart at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we still have the Uranus-Pluto squares opposing the U.S. Sun in Cancer and opposing the U.S. Saturn in Libra, and of course squaring them as well. So 2014 and 2015 find the Uranus-Pluto squares active to the U.S. Sun and Saturn. Here are all of the aspects. Again, you'll get the PDF file of these slides afterwards. You can still see that throughout 2015, Pluto is going to be making the waxing squares to Saturn. Last year, it made the oppositions to the Sun, while Uranus opposed Saturn squared the Sun. Go back to this chart. One of the things that many astrologers have always seen, regardless of the houses, just looking at this square with the signs, we've got the mom apple pie and equal liberty for all with Saturn and Libra. But if we look at how the reality of the square has worked out, there really has been a lot of inequality. And there really has been a lot of racism in this country, whether you're just looking in the larger picture with blacks and whites or Hispanics and whites, or if you're looking at the small little state where I'm from, where about 30% of our city is Native American, we see it on the Ho indigenous white area. Cancer can be that tribe. Cancer is the motherland of Africa. And so, is it any surprise that blacks have had such an interesting history in the United States with the sun in Cancer, not to mention 4 planets in Cancer? Pluto, transiting Pluto in Capricorn here, has been stirring all this up. And what you're seeing with these squares and oppositions that have been taking place here is the whole, Black Lives Matter, and then the corresponding counter protest of supporting your policemen to keep mom and apple pie safe. And so all this is stirred up. It'll continue to be stirred up throughout 2015. I think one of the reasons I use this chart is because most of the founders who did the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. They were practitioners and followers of astrology. They didn't know the 3 outer planets existed in the 1700s. They put Venus, Jupiter, and Sun in the second house of resources. And look at how we have got such a wealth of resources in the Earth second house in the U.S. Gives us a 9th house Pluto. Here's all of the foundings on religious freedom. However, Pluto and Capricorn, as we have watched transiting Pluto move through Sag, and now Capricorn, you saw how we had all of the religious wars that went on through Pluto and Sag, and how the U.S. has turned into be so rigid in you're a Christian and you worship God or you don't belong in this country, not recognizing we're all immigrants. So you're going to see, again, all of this activity with social unrest. I think we're going to see it with religious unrest as Saturn in Sag comes back into the picture. We're also going to see it with banking and resources. If you want more details on the whole banking system, I did a 2-set lecture on money, past, present, and future in the fall of 2013. Still very valid material. It's in section 3 of our Astro Library, and it is in, I think it's in our webinar pages. Leroy's going to have to answer that question for me, or if he knows. But here's the dates again. So just in a nutshell, you see both of these years are so active. The Uranus-Pluto squares to the U.S. Sun-Saturn. Stay tuned. More of the same. I had put together this just a quick little slide here on the Pluto hits to the U.S. chart. I'll let you look at these for a moment. I've spoken on these for several times. The oppositions to the sun is basically we have polarization and we have an identity crisis going on as to who we really are, from social issues to immigration issues, healthcare, universal versus private, and the financial issues between the haves and the have-nots. The first quarter squares to Saturn. The question is, are we going to make breakthroughs, or are we going to increase the polarization? With Uranus hits to the U.S. chart, there's last quarter squares to the Sun, which is the crises in consciousness over what no longer works. Again, the same issues. And Uranus is going to be working to blow them apart. And with the oppositions to Saturn, it's going to re-emphasize the polarizations again. Or do we have the ability to actually make changes? Because if we look back to the Gemini rising chart, this transiting Uranus is in the 11th house, its own house of rulership, which is the instigation of social change. And if you look at the history of the United States throughout time, you can see how we abolished slavery. You can see how we had the civil rights of the 1960s, how those are coming around to be addressed again. A lot of your social issues from the 60s, from the Uranus-Pluto squares, that would have taken place down here in the 4th house of this chart. They're coming back around to be addressed again. And Uranus, having Aries on the 11th house, is social rebels. And that is a history of our chart as a country. Yeah, international listeners, thank you for allowing me to use the US as a chart example. However, there's lots of trouble going on as well. I'm going to pause for a moment, take a drink of water, see if I got questions or comments.
By the way, Kim, those two classes you referred to were our feature presentations for our Astrology Reincarnation and Soul Conference in 2013. Real Money, the Past, and Real Money, the Future. You and Robert Gover did a good 2 or 3 hour expose on each of those. And they are in Section 3 of the Astral Library, and they're also located for individual sale as a streaming video workshop on the individual workshop page, which is under that drop-down menu with the Astral Library on the homepage.
All right, thank you very much for looking that up, Leroy. Appreciate that, honey. Again, still very valid issues, and those are the having equitable fiscal monetary policies for all citizens on planet Earth is probably the social cause that's nearest and dearest to my heart. That is my personal soapbox, because most of our central banks are private banking systems, and we need to have the grassroots effort to switch to public banking systems. And I explained that from the macro down to the micro, if you're not familiar with that. Another one is one of my favorite authors on money is Ellen Brown. And the Public Banking Solution is her latest book. Her first book was Web of Debt. The Public Banking Solution does a recapture of the web of debt, and she created the organization in the United States called the publicbankinginstitute.org. I got a slide on that coming up here somewhere. But it behooves all of us to be involved with how each of your countries manages your money. I don't care whether you're the dollar or the ruble or the euro or whatever it is that you work, or the pound, or whatever it is you work with. If you can't ignore it if you operate in the world of money. What about the treble? Treble notes. Saturn and Jupiter are quite active this year. Just a little bit on Saturn in Sagittarius. Here's the dates of the classes that Leroy spoke with. I'm going to do a part 1 right here, and I'm going to do a part 2 right here, because we have Saturn in Sag for 3 years, with the exception of these 3 months, June through September of this year, when Saturn goes back into Scorpio with a retrograde, as if we didn't have enough Saturn in Scorpio. I, for one, am so glad to release Saturn in Scorpio, because it kicked me in the butt about 10 times. So Saturn in Sag, as you can see from these dates, will feel like it is a breath of fresh air compared to Scorpio. However, any sign can be used or abused. And what we're going to have happening with Saturn in Sagittarius is we're going to start turning back to being very philosophical or religious or spiritual with however we are looking at whatever's going on in our life. Saturn is the individuated consciousness in EA, so it's the structure of consciousness. It is how each of us on an individual basis look at everything in our physical world and want to structure it or put it together. Now, Saturn in Sag, basically, if you're looking at the consensus world, observe, correlate, 7 out of 10 people, any country, race, religion, the consensus is one are going to go back to the past with Saturn and Sag. We need religion back in our life. You need to go to church on Sunday. We need morals. All of them single moms having birth out of wedlock need to get married. We're going to find a mini, it can almost feel like a mini Pluto in Sagittarius over the next 3 years with Saturn. We're going to want to go back to yesterday, and there can be a real strong moral rigidity that starts to come through in the consensus world. By God, if you just went to work and did something in your life, you wouldn't need all that helping hand and all that blah, blah, blah. Individuating Saturn and Sag, you're going to really recognize how things are not working anymore, and what are we going to do about it? You can feel lost. All states of consciousness, consensus, individuating, spirituating can feel lost. But the individuated state's going to go, what's the deeper meaning of all this? What's going on here? How do I make sense of it? How do I structure a larger picture of understanding so that I can feel at peace in my world? And that individuating state's going to be recognizing that there must be a fairness for everyone concerned. Where we have to be careful distorting is one of the distortions of Sag is compensation or making excuses or just, fluffing over things, the Pollyanna, or, oh, it'll be okay. Let's just have another couple drinks and we'll talk about it in the morning. We'll worry about it in the morning. And so the individuated state, as they reach these deeper meanings and understandings, are going to have to speak their truth. They're going to have to stand up for their truth. They're going to have to get involved in some of those social causes that are near and dear to them and be a part of the change they want to see in the world. And of course, if you're in the spiritual state of awareness and consciousness on a soul level, Saturn and Sag is going to have you really wanting to simplify your world and return to what we know as natural laws and principles, to really have that guide your world more and more and more. And one of the ways that we will do this, as happens with all mutable signs, is again, simplification, putting it all together, putting it together into its essence. And then we don't have to get caught up in that Gemini polarity of all the details driving us bananas or confusing us or upsetting us. And Saturn and Sag for the spiritual state will also, just like individuating, require us to speak our truth, walk our truth, be our truth, be involved on planet Earth. Financially, again, I see Saturn and Sag kind of returning us to the gambling heyday. Back in the Pluto and Sag days, when here in the United States we tore down the laws that had been in place since the 1930s that separated commercial banking from investment banking. And one of the things we did in that government spending bill last month in the U.S. is we restored bailouts. So if our too big to fail banks go under because of their derivatives gambling that was already in place before we started lowering the price of oil, if they go belly up, guess what? We'll be on the line again because the bailouts have been restored. And since 2008, almost all over the world. It's true for Europe, it's true for the US, it's probably true for Canada. I'm not absolute for that. True for many places. Bail-ins have been established very quietly, very secretly. What's a bail-in? If a bank too big to fail fails, and you have your checking account there, and you have $1,000 in your checking account, and that bank decides they need 10% of your checking account to cover their banking losses, they can take it. Who sets the percentage up? Depends. Could be the banks, could be the central bankers, the Federal Reserves, could be, the BIS, the Basel International Settlements in Switzerland that is overseeing almost all of your Western central banks. Stay tuned for this to be in the news more and more.
Well, it's not going to be like a confiscation of your money. They'll certainly get to return some stock certificates or something of equal value, but if the worst were to happen and bail-ins are needed, what's it going to be? What the stock value of the equity is going to be worth will be a heck of a lot
Yeah,
less.
yeah. They're going to take your cash. They're going to take your cash. They're going to give you stock in the failed bank, and you're going to feel like you got robbed of actual money. Remember how this almost happened in Cyprus a couple of years ago? Well, they have continued to implement it behind the scenes. And this is why I've got moveyourmoney.org and publicbankinginstitute.org if you're in the United States. Public Banking Institute is for the U.S. I'm going to, who knows, they may be expanding international, but Move Your Money is you put your money in a community bank or you put it in a credit union. You do not have it in the too big to fail banks. The credit unions don't take those they're not gambling in the derivatives market. So not all is lost, but it is about being smart. You only have deposits guaranteed up to 250,000 in banks in the U.S. Well, the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, does not have enough funds to cover 250,000 in your accounts in the too big to fail banks. If one of these banks fail, it'll wipe out the FDIC. There's going to be more of this, and I don't know if it's going to happen in 2015. I don't know if it's going to happen through Pluto and Sag, but I will tell you, it will happen within the next 10 years. We've got to change the system. We have got to separate commercial and investment banking again, because since 2008, the too big to fail banks did not change their ways. They are more exposed than they ever were in 2008. And it's all in the shadow banking system and the derivatives gambling market. And all it takes is one to go under, and there'll be a domino effect, and not just in the United States, but most likely worldwide the next time around. And I don't mean to be a doomsayer, because when I started researching all this with Pluto and Cap, I thought, what's the solution? And again, Ellen Brown, the public banking solution, behooves all of us to get involved with it. And this will rise up, just like we have marching in the streets on Black Lives Matter. It'll come, its day will come, and I don't pretend to predict, but I will forecast. So I've already kind of mentioned this. It basically, again, alternative media feel it's the U.S. and Saudi Arabia that are really forcing down the oil prices. And they're trying to do a behind-the-scenes thing of squeezing Putin. Only they're playing, the U.S. is playing with its own stability right here, because so many of our banks are in the derivatives market with oil commodities. And they say that the oil commodities is really only about 3% of the derivatives market for our big banks in the U.S. But that 3% in oil derivatives is about 14 trillion. Just to give you an idea of what it is.
Kim, It's
So,
Kim.
yes.
It's probably fair to point out that a lot of these derivatives are puts or calls, bets to go down or bets to go up on the prices of oil. And many times, as big moves in the oil market do occur, the banks are, they're closing out positions. It's not like it's a one-way bet that can never be monitored or closed out. So you just know that it's not an all or nothing gamble when you do work in that derivatives market. And so I think it's right to kind of temper the dramatic effect, even though it's tremendous amount of dollars represented by the underlying equity, the underlying asset. But these companies are consistently um, hedging the oil market through these derivatives, and they can either be bets on the price going up or the bets on the price going down. But they usually don't let a whole basket full of derivatives bets go to zero. They'll close out positions as the market moves against them. So I think it's fair to kind of talk about how that would work for a lot of companies that are trying to manage risk in large positions.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Former Stockbroker. But I'm being dramatic on purpose because I really do think we're messing around with our monetary systems.
Well, the
And the
numbers are so
monetary systems
overwhelming.
are not set up.
Yeah, like you say, the monies are so overwhelming. Just
Yeah,
that,
well,
just that just that 14 trillion you just referred to, that's just in the simple oil sector. Bets on prices of oil going up or
yeah,
down, either on U.S. Oil companies or like you say, the commodities end of those futures. But expand that to the total derivatives market. I think we saw the capitalization there one time, and I can't even remember the exact number. But if this is
the total derivatives market is getting close to 250 trillion.
so, there you go. Yeah.
You can't even fathom that, and but this is how out of touch the shadow banking system is with what's real for, average citizens no matter what country. And again, there are aspects that are coming the end of this decade, the beginning of next decade. The US is going to have its Pluto return in 2020. The Saturn will have one conjunction with Pluto at about 23 degrees Capricorn. And in 2020, Jupiter will have three conjunctions with Pluto between 21 and 23 degrees Capricorn. And then we'll have a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction out at 1 degree Aquarius in 2020. And then the US Pluto returns in 2022. But the other thing that has always controlled the stock market in the US chart, let me go out here for a second, and I want to go back and show you the US chart. The thing that has always controlled the stock market crashes in the US is the Mars in Gemini square Neptune in Virgo. And what we're also going to have happen in the early 2020s at the same time is we're going to have Neptune in Pisces make it up to the Neptune opposition and squaring Mars in Gemini. And that's in the early 2020s. And that'll be the same time that Pluto is in Cap, Jupiter is in Cap, Uranus is in Cap. And they're going to be on the U.S. Pluto-Mercury opposition. So if we don't see corrections before then, that's when we'll really see the big corrections with the whole banking world in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me move on so that we've got enough time. And thank you again. This is I own it, my personal soapbox, but I want financial fairness and opportunity for all citizens on planet Earth. So here's something that I'm not seeing a lot of astrologers speak about, and this is the fact that in 2015, Saturn makes three waning semi-squares to Pluto, and 3 waning sesquisquadrates to Uranus. And you can see the degrees there on the 360-degree wheel. In blue is Saturn has all 3 of its aspects to Pluto and Scorpio. It has 1 Scorpio, 2 Sag, 2 Uranus. And I put the 2015 aspects in red as I go through all the rest of this. So you can see all of them when they meet 3 times in the sky, but you can see the emphasis on 2015 here. And so here's the dates, here's the degrees, you'll have them. And here is the visual for you. Here's Saturn. Start with Pluto, 315 degrees around the chart, waning semi-square. Here's Uranus. You go 225 degrees around the chart. Here's the waning sesquisquadrate, visually. Saturn waning semi-squares to Pluto. Saturn is moving into balsamic phase with Pluto. It's the last of the 8 phases. And they are finishing up this mutual reception. Saturn will have the next of those 2 aspects, when it is back in Scorpio here in 2015. And so the balsamic phase is about surrender. It's about releasing the old. And you look at these 2 in their mutual reception, and it's about letting go of control and old realities. And neither one of these planets like to give it up. So the degree of resistance to letting go is going to be the degree of the cataclysms. And it's going to bring about through this balsamic phase, not just these aspects, but their balsamic phase, as Saturn moves through Sag and then through Capricorn, death and rebirth, figurative and literal. As Saturn went through those last few degrees of Scorpio, how many of you noticed an increase or an intensity of those who left planet Earth? We went through a wave of it, both Leroy and I, on both sides of the family, to the point that my beloved 15-year-old cat, it was 1 year ago today that he left his body. 1 month ago today. And it came on very fast, very sudden. And I'm learning to relate to him in spirit world, but boy, I got, talk about picking this one up real. So when we look at 2 planets in a balsamic phase, they have to look to the larger picture and deeper meanings. So now can you see the insistence with Saturn, Pluto on doing this with all of these social structures we have going on? All of us with intimate relationships, Saturn in Scorpio, our careers, the finances that no longer work the old ways. In the midst of this, when something's balsamic phase, we do get messages about how they would like to rebirth and move forward differently. Saturn moving to conjunct Pluto, which it'll do in 2020, one time, early 2020. I think it's January 12th, 2020, 23 degrees Capricorn. I already got it memorized. We'll get the future-orientated messages about the rebirth of the conjunction. But the future-orientated messages are also coming through with the Uranus square to Pluto. So that is there both ways. But I think you can just, boom, fit it together on how these waning semi-squares are going. Yeah, what am I being asked to let go of in my world? So where's your Pluto and Capricorn transit house? That's going to represent lifetimes of structures in your life, old structures, rules, authority figures, areas where you want to control. And how are you being asked to let go? And the Saturn in Scorpio transit house, that's the area of life that's trying to bring deeper understandings about the Pluto structures that you need to change. And so both of the transit houses of these 2 planets, you may have loss, you may have upsets. You may have financial issues. Scorpio and Pluto both bring about all of the financial stuff. And again, 2015 is an 8-year. Balsamic phase, pay attention to the inner messages. Pay attention to your dreams. What is your dream world trying to tell you? I have transiting Pluto literally in my 12th house. The morning after my kitty passed over, he came to me in a dream and he was playing in the snow. And he used to play in the snow all the time. 2 weeks after he crossed over, he came to me in another dream and he showed me the type of kitty he was going to reincarnate back as. Helped with some inner peace, but I still want him here physically. Saturn's waning sesquisquadrates to Uranus, the 225. This is where we go from full phase to disseminating phase. Disseminating phase is where we want to understand everything we can about groups, about society, how it's structured, how it's put together. And this Saturn-Uranus aspect is going to have us wanting to save society. It's the aspect of society. And yet, the bigger message is that Uranus in Aries says, nah, forget it. Starting a brand new 84-year cycle on change, and society's got to change. That's all there is to it. So if we address these sesquisquadrates in a negative manner, we're going to move into 2016 up to the 2017 waning trines, and the disillusionment, unrest, social uprisings will continue. If we start addressing it in a positive way in 2015 and understanding what in our societies are not working and how they have to change, then by the time we get to the waning trines, we'll see more societal benefits. We'll see our social systems evolving in some ways. This can include financial systems as well. This can include religious systems as well. When I say society, I mean it in all its many forms and structures and how it can be put together. What happens again with this sesquisquadrate, though, is Saturn thinks it has all the answers. It wants to tell Uranus what to do, how to operate, how this society should be functioning. Again, this is going to be Saturn in Sagittarius here, 1 in Scorpio, 2 in early Sag aspects. And Uranus is going to have the bottom line here. It is going to bring the upsets to Saturn and say, you must change and you must expand your viewpoints and you must look at new ideas and how society will operate. Individually, look to the transit house of your Uranus in Aries to see where you have new ideas coming through, where you are wanting to make changes in your life, and where you are having to embrace technology somehow, some way. Technology will exist in all 12 houses with Uranus in Aries, okay? The Saturn-Sag transit house, this is where we're going to feel uncertain or confused. We might want to pretend like we've got it all together, and yet there's something about that Saturn-Sag house that's not working in our personal life, and we've got to look to Uranus for solutions and ideas. So each of us are having to adjust to the changes in our relationships with work, with society, with the world at large. Each of us are having to deepen our understanding of life. And we have to have an individual application into society of how we are going to function in our world and how our world functions in the world of whatever society we are in the midst of. I'm starting to speed up because I got more to get through, everybody, so thank you for letting me do this. Saturn is going to make 3 last quarter squares to Neptune. They're going to really happen in 2016, but there'll be one the end of this year. So here's where, again, we start to have these mutable sign outer planets. And a last quarter square, that crises in consciousness, there's a loss of deeper meanings to our societal frameworks because whatever roles we have in society, they're not working as before. Our belief systems, however they're structured, they've got to adapt or they're going to have holes poked in them and they're not going to work for us anymore. And when it gets to these mutable signs with Neptune in Pisces, I think that Sagittarius relates to natural spiritual laws and principles, including literally nature itself. And Pisces relates to the totality of consciousness in all forms, which will include nature as a consciousness. So climate change is going to have an increasing role with Saturn in Sag and Neptune in Pisces, and especially as they make their last quarter squares. Climate change is going to change belief systems, and our beliefs around climate change are going to be changing. It's going to have to evolve and adapt. The consensus and government is going to have to catch up. Now, individually, we can have loss of meaning in our personal lives. Beliefs that no longer work, what needs to be released, how do we open up to deeper and larger understandings of truth? We want to be asking for truth to be revealed to us. And whatever the transit houses, we have Saturn Sag and Neptune in Pisces. And of course, one of the biggest ones we've got to look at here with these last quarter squares is an ability to have inner peace regardless of the chaos in the world. You might want to be working on that one right now because Saturn's already in Sag. More details on this type of subject with my Saturn series if you're interested, the Saturn in Sag series. And so just to review quickly here, I wanted to point this out to you. Saturn is waning to the 4 outer planetary archetypes. I've started including Chiron more and more. And I've been thinking about including Ceres as well as a dwarf planet. So Saturn in its waning relationship to these 4 outer planets means so much about our structure of consciousness. Is having to surrender and release to the deeper understandings of the 3 unconscious outer planets, and Chiron as that rainbow bridge between consciousness and unconsciousness. So we're having to look deeper and deeper. Saturn and Sag is bringing that about. Before 2014, Jupiter in Cancer was waxing to the 3 outer planets. And in 2014, it had the oppositions to Pluto. Now it's going to have waning inconjuncts to Pluto. It's going to have an opposition to Neptune. In the next couple of years, Jupiter is going to join Saturn in having waning aspects to the outer planets. And this is important in the larger picture of the next 5 years because Jupiter is going to have its last quarter squares to Saturn. That's coming up here. And so it's going to be in that type of a relationship to all 5 outer planets by the time we get to 2017. Thought I'd just point that tidbit out to you. What we really have going on with Jupiter in 2015 is it's going to be finishing up its yachts to Chiron. Jupiter's waxing in conjuncts to Chiron, interchanging inner adjustments around any sense of wounding. It's going to have waning in conjuncts to Pluto, how we are having to make outer changes to ourself with our world. First yacht September, it's tight in February, it's a wide orb in May, June of next year. So the Jupiter trouble notes. Jupiter is active, everybody. Again, 3 different aspects to Pluto. You'll see the red in 2015. So we're going from a waning inconjunct of 210 to a waning sesquisquadrate disseminating phase to the waning trines that will come along. And so just glancing at this, you can just see how active Jupiter is to Pluto. And Pluto is the first planet that it is now moving into a waning phase with. I put some notes together for it. In conjuncts, the outer world clashes, me versus you, us versus them. Jupiter in Leo is going to be fighting for our perceived individual rights in the face of authority. Just think of Ferguson, Missouri, and how this has evolved and morphed into Black Lives Matter. This will be going on with many different social areas. The waning sesquisquadrate, there's only one. And so this is where society is asked to make changes for the larger whole. This may or may not come about. Time will tell. And depending on how we move through that, then Jupiter will move into the three waning trines. And we're going to have authority either suppressing society, or we're going to have an evolution of societal structures depending on how we address social changes in a variety of areas throughout 2015 with Jupiter, Pluto. Individually, for many of us, we're going to have an evolving sense of our own unique creativity that we want to fulfill in society somehow. And we're going to have to recognize how we need to be a part of the changes in the world to have this creativity be accepted in the world. In the midst of that, we have to have a deepening inner love. Jupiter through Leo, and eventually we're going to have Jupiter move into Virgo with the other planets. With Pluto, it's all in it's excuse me. Oops, wrong one. Excuse me. Jupiter will move from Leo to Virgo. Pluto will remain in Capricorn through all of these aspects. And so that deepening inner love, that's really what Leo's about. And then as it shifts into Virgo, we turn it into self-improvement. And that's where we start taking care of self in healthier and healthier ways as we are still evolving our soul's beliefs and our creativity and how we want to be out there in the world. Jupiter is only going to have one opposition to Neptune in September. And so disillusionment may set in as our world belief systems crumble. Remember, Saturn's in Sag, so they're not going to make a tight T-square, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, but they're going to be within the T-square as signs, and the orbs will ebb and flow. And so again, Jupiter relating to Saturn, both of them relating to Neptune in that mutable environment. We're just gonna, what's it all mean? And so what we have to be careful of with this Jupiter-Neptune opposition is either trying to avoid reality check in our life and our world or not seeing it. As we start to work with conscious beliefs Jupiter, unconscious beliefs Neptune, we really want to be working with learning how to discern versus judge. Again, religion's going to come back into the news again. Its many varied ways, from the distortions to the natural expressions. We could have a mini renaissance of the New Age movement, as well as the insisting of this religion over that religion and the fundamentalist part of this religion versus the more mystical side of any religion. And what we're really needing to do is learning to recognize the interrelatedness of all species. and mutable signs that climate change could be very disruptive with Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, T-squaring by sign, and it's climate change. It's our pocketbooks that's going to bring about the necessary changes to healing climate and protecting Gaia. Individually, of course, this one is going to ask you how well you're loving yourself, others, all the way out to all species and Gaia, planet Earth itself. It has the potential to make us aware of deeper sadomasochistic patterns, and as we have an awareness of them, to be able to change them, heal them. Health breakdowns versus renewals, the health system will come back into the news as well. As we move through the year and Jupiter comes into this one opposition to Neptune. And of course, this is going to ask all of us to align our individual beliefs with universal beliefs. And what will be exposed is a limitation within our individual belief systems. And that limitation will then be the doorway, or the exposure of the limitation is the doorway to understanding it on a larger, more universal, timeless level. Jupiter is just as active with Uranus as it is with Pluto. 3 different aspects, as you can see, covering almost a 2-year time period here, but red is the activity in 2015, moves from Jupiter in Leo through Jupiter in Virgo. The waxing trines, the waxing sesquisquadrates, and the waxing inconjuncts. Jupiter's building to Uranus. So Jupiter's going to play a nice role with Uranus in Aries in that as Uranus wants to have all that deconditioning and liberating and racing forward with all its new ideas and new technology, Jupiter gets involved, especially with the waxing trines. And then the question becomes, as we move through the sesquisquadrates and inconjuncts, what can be sustained? Keywords, as I said right here, creative and technological explosions, selfish free-for-alls, one society pulling ahead of another, or one group of people pulling ahead of another. And when we get to those waxing sesquisquadrates, what can be sustained? That's where we start to question morality versus technology. Which one gets the upper hand? Or are we going to learn to put, as we like to say in my world of energetic balancing, how do we put technology in service of spirituality? That's one of the things that we've really had an issue with planet Earth. Technology races ahead of morality and spirituality. And then we wonder why everything is, has to be done more than once, why we have such social issues around some of the technological advances, because we're not bringing a spiritual perspective into the picture. And as we move to the waxing inconjuncts again, we have to make adjustments for the inequalities. Technology could continue to go haywire with Jupiter, Uranus. You think we've had some hacking? We just have gotten started. And many of the small community banks around the world are just really getting hit in the pocketbooks by all of the hacking that's going on with big companies. The Target stuff a year ago, Home Depot was compromised, all the big major international companies that get compromised. Many times, small community bank cards are getting compromised. Stay tuned. You're going to find that there's going to be, if your debit card or credit card through your community bank or through your big bank, if it gets compromised, I bet you in the next year or two, you're going to start to see fees to have those cards replaced. if and or you're going to see the US catch up with Europe, and instead of the magnetic strip on the back of the card, you're going to start to see those little chips. They're going to have to find more secure ways for our plastic cards to be handled, if not the fingertip technology, which is already there, by the way. You could see some of this stuff coming through here through these aspects, because the pocketbook can't keep up with the technology that's coming through and the wounded souls creating chaos in that way. On an individual level, for all of us, we're going to have to balance that desire and freedom to get ahead and be free and create and, just make it however we want to. It's going to have to be balanced with society. It's going to have to be balanced with where we are going to be in service to another or to a larger group. And we're all going to have to learn how to keep up with the technology in some way or be left behind. I have parents in late 70s, early 80s, and they do not have a computer. When I go to my mom and dad's, there's no internet. And my mom, and bless her soul, in her late 70s, is wanting to learn that world. She wants to keep up with it so she can see the Facebook pictures of her girls. So we're going to have to learn where we are at peace in that world. And inner peace. I highlighted this one in red. We're really going to have to look for inner peace through the changes on planet Earth. And we're also going to want to be searching for natural spiritual laws and principles, especially as Jupiter goes into Virgo and makes the uncomfortable aspects to Uranus. Jupiter waxing in conjuncts to Chiron, and it's going to make the first of the 3 oppositions to Chiron in 2015. So here again, are we going to have an ability to recognize how so many souls have wounding on planet Earth? Are we going to recognize how much inequality we have on planet Earth? Are we going to continue to have a polarization of that between haves and have-nots? Are we going to start helping each other and start healing each other? Sadomasochism, it's either going to be intensified with these aspects, or through the exposure of it, we're going to be seeing it healed in new ways. Social, again, these 2 planets will be involved in quite a bit of social justice, social causes that will have us wanting to be involved in helping those that are less than, or species, animals less than. These aspects will have many of us wanting to fight for species on planet Earth that are in danger of going extinct with climate change. Individually, recognizing what is unique and special within yourself, love yourself, making peace with your own faults, because there's not a one of us who's perfect, and honoring the temple of your soul, diet, exercise, rest. Jupiter has the first of the 3 last quarter squares to Pluto towards the end of the year. Again, this is where society reaches the max of what it can create. And it starts to have the breakdown, the last quarter square, the crises in consciousness. This is where we start to see the consequences from the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. There was one conjunction in May of 2000 at 23 degrees Taurus. So we'll see consequences of this in the distortions, in the materialism that just won't support us anymore. We can see possible rewards of it as well. Think back, for those of you who were adults back in 2000, what were you creating in your world back then 15 years ago? What has reached its point of manifestation? What's coming through as rewards for you? Last quarter square isn't just all breakdown. It is a crisis in consciousness. We've built up structures to a certain point. How do we function through them? How do we maintain them as we're recognizing they no longer serve us? So again, on an individual level, breakdowns or rewards, how does our personal role in society no longer serve us in some way? And yet, we still have to function in society. We still have to function in our family. We still have to function in whatever particular structure we've put together. How do we serve ourselves and others? Because these Jupiter last quarter squares are going to be with Saturn, Jupiter in Virgo, and Saturn in Sagittarius. So there's going to be a lot of internalization and pondering. And yet we're all still going to have to function in that outer world, especially as chaotic as it's going to be. Nodal axis, Libra Aries through November 12th, when it will move into Virgo Pisces. And so towards the end of the year, it will really emphasize again Jupiter Virgo, Saturn Sag, Neptune Chiron Pisces. But for most of the year, that South Node is in Aries. And we're shedding the old ego. You start to get a handle on how the South Node in Aries is operating for you as you look at this. Shedding old defenses and patterns. Finding new levels of emotional inner security, or inner emotional security. We're going to have a South Node eclipse season this spring. Here's the degrees. And here's where they're visible. And again, you'll have these slides to listen to. Or listen to. You'll have the video to listen to. You'll have the slides to look at. This would be the first eclipse in the Virgo Pisces axes. Otherwise, we're Aries Libra through the rest of the year. So a lot of that cardinal energy is going to continue through the eclipse seasons. And how are we moving forward? As the eclipses move into Virgo Pisces, it'll really have us doing a lot of pondering of belief structures. The North Node in Libra, again, relationships, evolving relationships with the other. Finding new levels of how we are together versus polarization. Taking collective relationships to new levels. Remember, we have to make the conscious effort with all of this cardinal energy from Uranus and Pluto to go in this direction, to go in the direction of relationships. As we move into the fall, we'll have the North Node eclipses. Oops, I was wrong. We have one each in Virgo Pisces and one each in Aries Libra. You see the transitioning of the eclipses starting to come as we move through. Now, one thing to note is that both of the spring eclipses are total solar, total lunar. And then when we move into fall, we have a partial solar and a total lunar eclipse. So 3 out of 4 eclipses are total, which means they're more intense, which means we feel it even more. Stay tuned as we get towards eclipse season. I'm sure I'll have some classes that'll come along in more detail on that. Just wanted to touch base for you and give you these dates and degrees for your own knowledge. Mercury. This year, all of the Mercury retrogrades are in air signs, and believe it or not, Mercury will be in air signs 6 months out of the year. I started adding it all up, and I think it comes to 6.5 months that Mercury will be in air signs. So reflect on this for a moment. Look at all the intensity of change we have going on. Uranus, Pluto base nodes, Jupiter, Saturn being so active with them and with most of the outer planets. And now we have Mercury stirring it all up, exaggerating things, confusing things, miscommunications. You really want to make an effort this year to listen, to communicate just as clearly as you can. And may I suggest you have paper trails. Those paper trails could be of a benefit with Mercury retrograde in the air signs because it can help to clear up the miscommunications. This is why we'll have more stirring up of all of the social issues this year as well. Mercury retrograde in air signs. It has everybody talking, more than usual. It has everybody trying to be heard, more than usual. And this will happen on an individual basis. It'll happen on a collective basis. And so sometimes slowing down and taking some deep breaths and listening on an inner level might be one of the most important things that you could do. Oops, I just noticed something I didn't correct. 22, 24, 21, that's last year. I didn't get these changed. I'll change them on the PowerPoint slides. And so when you look at the actual PowerPoint slides, you'll see the actual dates in there. Just noticed I didn't change that. Hey, there's one of those little air details. Remember I told you about that paper trail thing? I got my own paper trail to take care of. And finally, Venus retrograde, July 25th through September 6th. This will be the last time Venus initiates a retrograde in Virgo. 8 years from now, Venus makes that 5-pointed star. Every 8 years it has 5 retrogrades and it makes a 5-pointed star. It's been turning retrograde every 8 years in Virgo here for 104 years. It's 104 years in each sign, and it reverses through each of the 5 signs in making that 5-pointed star. So 8 years from now, in what will that be, 2023, Venus will go retrograde at probably 28 degrees Leo. So this is the last time of a Venus retrograde in Virgo. So it's still going to have an impact on this retrograde cycle. Self-love, Leo. Self-improvement, Virgo. It will bring about crises in life, crises in love that we're going to that'll need to be addressed throughout the course of this summer. Can bring up childhood wounds and lessons around that. So it's definitely going to bring up the what about me syndrome and the need for objectivity. You know, when Venus is retrograde in Leo, it's the prima donna. You know, it's the trauma drama. It is trying to draw all of the attention to ourselves, and Leo points to Aquarius, and there's the need for the objectivity, to detach back from that, to really work on inner love versus the trauma drama with this retrograde. Again, we can look at this in more detail in July and August as we move into what's happening on planet Earth and our own individual worlds as we move through that. The Venus retrograde will have us dealing with creativity. And how do we actualize creativity within our world? And what are our values around creativity? Because Venus retrograde is always working through values as well. So, 2015 trends, change, change, change. Finding that inner peace through our changing world. Recognizing what are the individual roles that we must fulfill within our family, within whatever societies we function in, with the world at large. And from my perspective, becoming an advocate for public banking systems, becoming an advocate for all species, and becoming an advocate for planet Earth. And so, I hope this has been of value to all of you, and I did make it through in less than 2 hours, haha. Um, Here are my classes as we move through the rest of the month of January. And do I have questions, comments? Leroy didn't interrupt me too much. Anything that I might not have addressed that somebody has a question about?
Kate McManus, are you mic'd? Would you like, you have your hand up here on my board. Would you like to ask a question of Kim, Kate? Nope, I think that was just a inadvertent raised hand, I guess.
That's okay.
You know, you covered a lot, Kim, and it did very well. Thank you for all the information. You know, just reminding everyone that as Uranus and Pluto square off and complete their last of 7 waxing squares, you know, that there's just this real uncomfortable chasm that continues to exist between the old and the new now.
Mm-hmm.
And so patience, as we've always known, is a virtue, but patience and, you know, watching the changes, knowing that everything is happening and everything is in divine order and the changes are coming. And it may be somewhat hidden with Pluto, of course, the way Pluto operates. And just be patient and loving with yourself and have a great year, everyone.
Thank you, Leroy. Yeah, that's my words as well. You know, it's going to continue to be pretty chaotic out there as the old breaks down and the new figures out how it's going to come forth. And whatever the new will be is dependent upon how all of us on planet Earth choose to be involved. So find what juices you and become an advocate for the change you want to see in the world. Thank you, everyone. And, you know, above all, go out this year